Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
A special welcome to any visitors here. My name is Father Nate. I'm the pastor here at Holy Family Parish, and we welcome especially the Konechny and Gorecki families as they baptize little Declan today. Calvin Kiptum is a 23-year-old professional runner from Kenya. Over these last few months, he's been running an average of 170 miles per week. Do the math. He's been eating a strict diet of ugali, rice, and indigenous vegetables from Africa. And luckily for him, he's been staying injury-free. Last month, on October 8th, Calvin stepped up to the starting line at the Chicago Marathon. 2 hours, 0 minutes, and 35 seconds later, he crossed the finish line as the winner of the marathon. Not only did he win the Chicago Marathon, he shattered the world record for competitive marathon times. Since 1908, the world record for men's marathons has been broken over 40 times, which is a testament to all of the improvements that we've made in our diet, training regimen, medicine, and shoe technologies and your clothing. Just a few years ago, if you were to ask the question, is it possible to run the marathon in under 2 hours? You would have been laughed at because no one was anywhere close to it. And yet, Calvin Kiptum was just 36 seconds from running the marathon in under 2 hours. What people might call humanly impossible is just a matter of time that it becomes not just possible, but likely. In our culture today, there are a lot of things that our Christian faith holds dear that today's culture, our American 21st century culture, considers ridiculous, outdated, and downright impossible. There's this cynicism that can easily take hold, directed at a lot of the things that we believe and that we hold true. And especially it's directed at the younger generation. So the same cynicism that could say, you can't run a marathon in under 2 hours. That's impossible. The same cynicism says, you can't practice abstinence before marriage. No one does that. That's impossible. You can't expect to stick with the same spouse your whole life. That's impossible. You can't possibly be happy as a priest. You're going to be lonely. That's impossible. And yet today we're hearing these words from Jesus, the greatest among you. The greatest among you. In other words, Jesus says greatness is possible. It's going to take a lot. You're going to be challenged a lot in order to be great. But the greatest is the one who is the servant, and the one who is exalted is the one who humbles himself. So this week we're commemorating National Vocation Awareness Week. You can see it smacked on the cover of your bulletin. Just before Mass, we had one of our students announce that the boys from Sacred Heart School are here to fundraise for their trip to Mexico coming soon. So please be generous with them. They're all discerning whether God is calling them to the priesthood. They're in their high school years now. On the inside cover of the bulletin, you'll see some photos of our seminarians of the Diocese of Gary. These are your future priests. You'll also see photos of sisters in formation for the Franciscans in Mishawaka. These were the sisters who used to teach at St. Joseph. These are examples of specific callings from God that are calls to greatness. But greatness is not limited to the priesthood. It's not limited to religious life. Greatness is extended to everybody who is here. When we talk about vocations in the church, we're talking about those lifestyles that contribute to the well-being of the church. Vocations are not jobs. They're not professions. They're lifestyles. Who here is not married 24/7? Few hours you take off of marriage per day. No one does that. I don't stop being a priest when I finish with Sunday masses. No. A vocation is a lifestyle, and so we're looking at main vocations: priesthood, religious life, sisters or brothers, the vast majority of you, married life, and then single life for those who are not married or are no longer married. All of these are commitments to service to others, because it's not about you, now it's about others. All of them are important in the life of the church, and all of them require a huge dose of humility to be lived well. In this parish, I'm convinced that there are lots of young men that God is inviting to consider a call to the priesthood. There are lots of young women, I think, that God is inviting to consider being sisters. And I'm strongly convinced that the vast majority of the youth in our parish are being invited by God to live marriage. But not just any marriage, heroic marriage, one that looks different from the marriage that you see out in our culture. Let me give you an example of how I looked at my vocation when I was younger. So when I was in high school and college, I had been thinking about different things. I wanted to be a doctor, wanted to get married, but I kind of thought about priesthood too. So the vocation director was regularly in contact with me. Vocation director's job is to recruit young men who are interested in learning more about the priesthood. So the vocation director would call me, would leave me messages, would send things in the mail to me. And because I was kind of on the fence, I was a little bit scared, what I would do is I would hide from him and not respond. We have a word for that. It's called ghosting. Now that I'm the vocation director of the diocese and I'm in charge of recruiting, now I get a taste of my own medicine and I feel what it's like to be ghosted. And that's understandable, right? Because when we're young, we want to know what we're getting into before we dive in. We want to be in control of our future. We don't want to commit ourselves to something and fear that we're missing out on something better or more important that comes along. And so that's how I felt about the priesthood. When I was in high school, I felt I don't have what it takes to be a priest. I'm not going to be happy as a priest. And I don't want to be a priest because it's going to be so much harder than marriage, because marriage is so easy, right, everybody? But isn't that the way that we think so often when we're young? If you're a priest or a religious sister, you're way up here in the church. If you're married or you're single, you're way down here like second-class citizens. Unfortunately, if we have that mindset, aren't we just settling for second best and avoiding greatness? How many married couples here, when you were preparing to get married, how many of you were told that the well-being of society depends upon healthy families? Our culture doesn't tell us that. But that's what we as the church believe, that the well-being of society depends upon healthy families. So why would married couples be down here when it comes to the life of the church? Think of how much more vivacious and credible and vibrant our Catholic Church would be if our young people were told, if you get married, your marriage matters dearly. If all of us, everyone in these pews, were firmly convicted that your vocation mattered dearly in the life of the church, how much more vibrant of a church we would be. Because now everyone's intentional. Now you're not just sliding into marriage because there's nothing else better to do, or because you're forced into it or coerced into it. What if every single young person was intentional and said, God, where are you leading me right now? How are you inviting me to greatness? Because that's not going to come from our culture. Our culture does not challenge you and me to greatness. Maybe on the marathon course, or maybe in sports, or maybe in your job or in your quest to make money. Yeah, you might be challenged to greatness. But what about making a lifelong commitment? Or staying true to your vocation in life? Or what about striving for virtue? Or being responsible? Or exercising self-control? Those are not areas where our culture challenges us to be great. Our culture does not reward virtue. Instead, what does our culture do? Our culture downplays celibacy as repressive. Our culture laughs at and ridicules a young person's decision to practice self-control with their sexuality. Our culture mocks the notion of receiving as many children from God as he wishes to give to you as somehow irresponsible. This culture clearly does not push you and me to be great. So a question for all of our young people here. Why then would you let the culture influence the most important decision you will ever make, which is the vocation that's meant to make you holy? Why wouldn't you leave that up to God instead? the God who wants you to be happy and knows what will make you truly happy. You and I are all capable of greatness. It requires the grace of God. You can't do it on your own. But it does require everything you've got. The one who bows low, Jesus says, is the one who is lifted high. The one who humbles himself is the one who is exalted. And you know what that requires? It requires humility, heroic humility. And to be a hero is hard. When you look at your job or your career, the thing that you do, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, you do that to make money. You do that to rise above. You do that to advance. And it's mostly about you, which is fine. But with your vocation, it's the exact opposite. How many of you here got married to make money? I didn't think so. You don't get married or become a priest or become a sister to make money. Instead, you pour out your resources for the benefit of others, your spouse, your children. You don't live your vocation to rise above others. You do it to lift others up. Your spouse, your children, you lift them up at your own expense. And you don't live your vocation to advance the ranks. You do it to take a step back so that others can go in front of you. Your vocation is not about you. It's about others and the ones you serve. And because it's about others, your vocation requires you and me to be heroes. It requires you and me, like Kelvin Kiptum, to push yourself to cross that finish line and break your record. Because when lived well, your vocation is hard. Being a hero is hard. Being like everybody else is easy because you're not challenged to greatness. Kelvin Kiptum is only 23 years old, which means he has quite a few more years of his prime to eventually break the 2-hour marathon. He can do what everyone before him has considered impossible as long as he strives to be great. You and I can also do what we've considered impossible as long as we strive for greatness. So today, wherever you find yourself, if you're married or you're divorced or you're widowed, if you've stayed single your whole life, if you're a priest or you're a sister, or if you're young and you're still asking God where he's leading you in life. We're a community here, so let's support and encourage one another. Let's receive the grace that God is giving to us, and let's respond to God's call to live our vocations heroically. Amen.